Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John, the reporters for the 20th of May. We had quite an exciting day on Wednesday here as we literally were below the 76% on the ES Daily and dipped, all the way back down to nearly retest the lows, but stayed above the 61% level as we see lows starting to rise. That could put a little bit more downside pressure on the market. At this particular point, we can see NBI white here moving above the magenta. At this particular stage, that's not entirely a bullish configuration. You also have steel falling. Saving grace here would be on the DOC, just midterm buyers at least holding things up. And what you had was, Fed minutes there talking about eventually they're going to have to do that taper of slowing down the purchases and that, which means that heaven forbid, things would actually have to support themselves as opposed to being floated with endless free money. That would be quite a disrupt, but by later in the day, they decided that, no, in fact, things are going to stay the same. So that caused a huge buyback. Coincided with the sell-off that we saw in cryptocurrencies. We're starting to see some of that transition, and I talked about that one before and its relationship to gold and how some would flip from that speculation and that to moving into back to real base metal. Anyway, going to the NASDAQ here, this was kind of the critical one we've been watching. Every time it dips below the 50%, you seem to get a broad liquidation point, and at this particular stage, they've been hitting that 38% and buying it all back, and as soon as it gets back above the 50%, you get a rocket effect going forward. Still strong from an NBI indicator reading here. The rising blue in that, you do have this potential, though, if the magenta dips back below yellow, that you would see increased selling. And at a certain point, if they're not able to drive this all the way back up, that is going to want to be pulled towards that zero line. And that's something that we'll be keeping an eye out for going forward. Definitely going to be an interesting catalyst, particularly as summer starts. Gold continuing its strong support, and there's just no reason to think that it's not going to continue to do. We expected just a tiny bit of weakness with that steel crossing below immediately below cyan, but super strong with that shakeout. All positive extremes. So yes, eventually all these levels going all the way back to right here in the 1787 range. It's going to get filled back, but not just. Got to wait for a catalyst or a signal that actually promotes that. And of course, the euro continuing its rise. So what we had was open on the 5K here. We were in a decline, and I've been pointing this out throughout the last several days. This indication of when we get a white NBI over the magenta, it usually suggests a return back to the lows after you have this pump phase. And literally what we look for is that ideal situation that we would normally see where you have the blue NBI dips below the gray or the magenta dipping below yellow. In this particular case, when you have that white protrusion above, just getting below the 33 move usually indicates a continuation of that. And we can see that the white stayed pretty much in the lead on most of it. And when we did get the little surpass, that's where you get the little bump. If you don't get a continuation straight across, it just collapses back down. And I kept pointing out all of those where the white had done these. Once we got to midday, I was starting to post all those, and it was just suggesting that we were going to be at least returning back to the original signal point of when it first crosses over. And that's usually the guidelines. In this case, it was right around that 57, and here you went just a fraction below it, but same situation. And then we finally caught a little bit of a run here, and the difference with some of those is where we start to look at the steel reading, or if we see green move over cyan. In this particular case, it started to head lower, and then the green moved above, and then we started to get these continued moves above the 33 with even the yellow, and in the brief break of it, where it turned around, did the exact same thing, it stayed up there. And then even here, when this one started, you have one of the opposite configurations where steel is crossing above on the DOC, the cyan, as well as orange, and then you even get the orange dip, and of course, then you even had cyan under red. So you're in for a sprint of some sort, and then you're just looking for that breakdown, which has to coincide not just with the steel dipping below, the magenta dipping below 33, but you also want to see the white moving up at least above its highest peak. So if you take a look at these peak points right there, like this was 311, and then we had 429, you'd want to be right where that's taken that over and you're dipping below. And you see that didn't happen there. I find the 7 value is usually pretty reasonable in this particular case. So when all of them finally did dip below the 33, we were finally looking at a weight reading there in the 7.3 range. And that led to a dip, a small pump, and then literally just cascaded lower. And then we saw that similar wave action throughout. So there's just a lot of up, down selling. But most of all of these that were coming through was with magenta over. And so you knew that you were in for probably fairly decent continuation. The most recent one where it popped above was right about here, and we pretty much stayed across with that until right about here where we just broke above, and then the white moved above 7.8 just before it turns to the red, and that created a little bit of a dip move. And we're starting to see a few more of those, so potentially we could see a little bit more weakness out of this setup. But I wanted to go over that so that you're kind of aware of it, working and programming at it to help get that out to you and make it easier to see some of those configurations and how they'll play out in the future. As always, though, trade well. We'll talk to you later.